In March 2026, Britain's Labour government did something that would have been politically difficult to imagine 5 years earlier. A Labour Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, described what her government was doing as, and this is a direct quote from her written ministerial statement, the most sweeping asylum reforms in modern times. Here is what actually changed, based on verified official documents. From March 2, 2026, adults who are granted refugee status in the UK receive 30 months of temporary permission to stay. Not 5 years, as previously. 30 months, reviewed, renewed, and potentially revoked at the end of each period. According to official documents and advocacy groups tracking the changes, this process could be repeated up to 8 times, meaning someone could wait up to 20 years before becoming eligible to apply for permanent settlement. Unaccompanied children are exempt from this change for now. The previous rules continue for people who claimed before March 2, 2026. Alongside the change to refugee status, the government introduced what it calls a visa break, banning citizens of Afghanistan, Cameroon, Myanmar, and Sudan from applying for certain mainstream visa routes to the UK. It also moved to replace a legal duty to provide asylum support to destitute applicants with a discretionary power, a change that advocacy groups have flagged as carrying significant risk of destitution for the most vulnerable. These changes were implemented primarily through amendments to the immigration rules, a process that does not require a parliamentary vote to take effect. That constitutional detail has received less attention than the policies themselves. Here is the political context worth examining. In the year ending June 2025, a record 105,000 people applied for asylum in the UK, according to House of Commons library figures. Net migration stood at around 200,000, significantly lower than its peak, but still a major political pressure point. Reform UK won 4 million votes in 2024 substantially on an immigration platform. Labour's traditional base in working-class communities holds more restrictionist views on immigration than its urban progressive base. The government faces a structural political dilemma. One interpretation is that these reforms represent an attempt to hold both parts of that coalition simultaneously, tough enough to prevent hemorrhaging votes to reform, framed carefully enough to retain progressive support. Whether that interpretation accurately reflects the government's motivations cannot be confirmed from official statements alone. What can be said is that the political context in which these reforms were designed is highly relevant to understanding them. Now, here is the aspect of this story that is receiving less analytical attention than it deserves. The government has explicitly cited Denmark as its model. The Home Secretary's written ministerial statement says, confirmed in the official published text, that the reform was inspired by Denmark's success. Denmark, since 2015, has made refugee status temporary, subject to review every 2 years, introduced restrictions on family reunion, and increased the wait for permanent settlement to 8 years, subject to strict integration and employment requirements. The government's statement notes, and again this is confirmed, that while Denmark was cutting asylum claims to a 40-year low, the UK saw a 13% increase in the year to September 2025. Across the EU, applications fell by 22% over the same period. Here is where the analysis moves beyond confirmed facts into contested territory, and that distinction matters. The government's claim is that Denmark's approach reduced arrivals, and that the UK's approach, modeled on Denmark, will do the same. One interpretation consistent with the available evidence is that Denmark's reduction in asylum applications reflects multiple simultaneous policy changes and geographic factors, not solely the temporary status model. Denmark is not an island. The UK is. Denmark's deterrent effect, if any, may partly reflect onward movement to other European countries, rather than reduce journeys overall. The Migration Observatory at Oxford University has stated the UK plans would make Britain more restrictive than most other high-income countries. The IPPR has described the plans as creating what it calls a near-perpetual state of insecurity. Whether temporary status deters irregular arrivals, or whether it primarily increases uncertainty for people already here, is the central contested question. The evidence does not yet clearly support one conclusion over the other. Here is the four-voice picture of how this story is being seen. The government says this restores order to a broken system, provides fair but firm protection, and creates incentives for legal routes rather than illegal crossings. Critics from the left say the reforms create destitution risks, undermine integration, and punish people for circumstances outside their control. Critics from the right say the reforms do not go far enough, that only a fundamental renegotiation of the Refugee Convention would achieve the deterrence claimed. The overlooked perspective, the operational one, is being raised quietly by the Home Affairs Committee and legal specialists. The committee noted in March that some proposals are unclear and underdeveloped. The Law Society of Scotland has raised concerns about the administrative burden. A system that already struggles with its existing backlog will now need to process renewal claims at scale every 30 months for the entire refugee population that arrived after March 2026. Before the verdict, the skeptics challenge. What evidence would challenge the government's deterrence claim? Denmark's reduction in asylum claims began before its temporary status reforms took full effect, suggesting other factors may have been primary. The people making dangerous crossings of the English Channel are, by definition, making a decision under conditions of extreme risk. The available evidence does not clearly establish that the permanence of eventual status is their primary consideration. What evidence would challenge the critics' strongest claims? It is also not established that temporary status inevitably produces destitution. That depends significantly on how the discretionary support power is exercised in practice, which is not yet known. The operational burden concern is real, but the government has announced new legal routes as an alternative pathway, which, if functioning effectively, could reduce review caseload by diverting some refugees into different visa streams. The evidence does not clearly support either the government's strongest claim or its critics' strongest claim as fully established fact. Here is what can be stated with confidence and what cannot. What we know. 30-month temporary refugee status, in force from March 2, 2026. Confirmed. Visa break on 4 nationalities. Confirmed. Danish model cited as explicit inspiration. Confirmed in official documents. Changes implemented primarily through immigration rules without a parliamentary vote. Confirmed. Migration Observatory, more restrictive than most high-income countries. Confirmed. What we do not know. Whether temporary status will reduce irregular arrivals. Whether the Home Office has operational capacity to deliver reviews at scale. Whether legal challenges will succeed. What the full cost to integration and well-being will be in measurable terms. Here is why this matters beyond the United Kingdom. Every country this channel covers is watching Britain's reforms closely. Australia ran its own version of this experiment, offshore processing, temporary protection visas, and the results remain contested a decade later. Canada is facing its own political pressure over irregular crossings and public opinion shifts. New Zealand is watching the regional signals. Britain is essentially running a live policy experiment. If temporary asylum status reduces irregular arrivals without generating successful legal challenges under the Refugee Convention, it becomes a template for Anglosphere democracies facing the same pressures. If it generates legal challenges, backlog crises, or demonstrably fails to deter arrivals, that is equally instructive for every government watching. The principle at the center of this debate is worth stating precisely. Not, is immigration good or bad? That is not what the Refugee Convention asks. The Convention asks whether someone faces persecution. What Britain is doing is changing not who qualifies, but how secure that status is once granted. That distinction is the one that will be tested in the courts, in the Home Office, and in the real experiences of the people affected in the years ahead. I'm the Anglosphere Report, the stories your local media won't connect. Tell me in the comments, do you think temporary asylum status is a necessary reform, or does it create more problems than it solves? And what should a fair asylum system look like in 2026? See you tomorrow.